6 weeks after I retired, a letter arrived from a law firm in Brussels telling me I had inherited $340,000 from a distant relative I had never heard of. By the time I understood what was actually happening, $94,000 of my retirement savings was gone. And the man who helped drain it had been sitting across from me at my kitchen table every April for 13 years. My name is Carol Whitfield. I am 61 years old, and I live in Richmond, Virginia. If this is your first time here, please subscribe and leave me a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one. Now let me tell you how a letter from a country I had never visited, written by a man who did not exist, nearly destroyed the retirement I had spent 34 years building. And how the person who made it possible was someone I had trusted completely, someone who had sat beside me at my husband's funeral and held my hand while I wept. I was a librarian for 34 years. I want you to understand what that means, not the caricature, not the quiet woman behind the desk with the reading glasses and the rubber stamp. I mean the real thing. I spent 34 years at Jefferson High School in Richmond building a library that students actually wanted to be in. I fought for the budget every year. I stayed late. I learned the names of every student who came through those doors with a look on their face like they were looking for something they couldn't name, and I found them the right book. I was good at my job. I was proud of my job. I retired in September of the year before last, on a Friday afternoon, to a small reception in the school library with store-bought cake and a card signed by 217 students. My colleague Janet cried. I did not, because I had made a private agreement with myself that I would leave the way I had always tried to run that library, with composure and with dignity. I cried in the car on the way home. My husband Robert had died 20 months before my retirement. A heart attack, early on a Tuesday morning in March, in the kitchen where he had made coffee every day for 31 years. He was 63 years old. He had been planning to retire the following spring. We had talked about Portugal, about the Azores, about long mornings with nowhere to be, and the particular luxury of reading a book without checking the time. He did not get those mornings. I was going to have to find a way to have them for both of us. Our son Matthew lived in Denver, a software engineer, 33 years old, calm and steady in the way that Robert had been calm and steady. He called every Sunday without fail. My younger sister Diane lived 12 minutes away and came for dinner every Wednesday. I was not alone in any meaningful sense. But I was lonely in the specific way that only people who have lost a long marriage understand, the loneliness of a house that still holds the shape of someone who is no longer in it. Robert's reading chair. The particular way the light fell on the kitchen table at 7 in the morning when he would have been sitting there. I managed. I had always managed. I had also, in the practical sense, managed quite carefully. Robert and I had saved all our lives, not extravagantly, but consistently and without shortcuts. By the time I retired, I had a pension from the school district, a modest 401k, a savings account with enough to cover 3 years of expenses without touching the retirement funds, and a house on Sycamore Lane that was fully paid off. It was not wealth, but it was security. It was the accumulated result of 3 decades of careful choices, of packed lunches and sensible cars and vacations we took close to home. It was enough. Daniel Marsh had been my accountant for 13 years. I met him through a colleague at school, a math teacher named Felicia, whose taxes he had handled for years. She recommended him after Robert, and I bought our first rental property in 2009 and suddenly needed someone who understood more than a simple W-2. Daniel was 48 years old, precise, professionally warm, the kind of man who remembered small details, your daughter's college major, the name of your dog, the year you bought the house, and deployed them naturally in conversation in a way that made you feel genuinely seen rather than managed. He had come to Robert's funeral. He had brought a casserole 3 days later and sat at the kitchen table for an hour and asked nothing of me except to be present while I talked. He checked in on me twice in the months that followed, brief calls, nothing intrusive, just a voice saying he was thinking of me. He was, I believed, a good man. He was, I believed, my friend. The letter from Brussels arrived on a Thursday morning in mid-October, 6 weeks after my retirement. It came in a cream-colored envelope with a Belgian postage stamp and a return address printed in a clean serif font. Vandermeer, Clays and Associates, Legal Counsel, Rue du Commerce 47, Brussels. I stood at the mailbox on Sycamore Lane in the October morning light and read it twice before I went inside. The letter was 3 pages, printed on heavy paper with an embossed letterhead, and it informed me in formal but readable English that a Mr. Heinrich Albrecht Whitfield, formerly of Ghent, Belgium, had died on the 14th of August without direct heirs, and that following an extensive genealogical search conducted by the firm on behalf of the estate, I had been identified as his closest surviving relative through the line of his brother Ernst, who had emigrated to the United States in 1931 and settled in Virginia. The inheritance, pending legal processing and the satisfaction of applicable Belgian estate requirements, was valued at 342,000 American dollars. I set the letter on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. My maiden name was Albrecht. My grandfather's name had been Ernst. I called Daniel that same afternoon. He answered on the second ring, which he almost always did. I read him the letter over the phone slowly. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a brief silence, and then he said he would like to see it in person. Could I scan and email it, or better yet, could we meet for coffee that week? We met on Saturday morning at a cafe near his office. He read through all 3 pages with his reading glasses on and his coffee untouched, the way he always read financial documents, with complete attention, as if the world outside the pages had temporarily ceased to exist. When he finished, he took off his glasses and folded them and looked at me. "It looks legitimate," he said. "The letterhead is consistent with a registered Belgian legal practice. The genealogical detail is specific enough to be credible. I'd want to do a bit more research before you respond, but I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand." I asked him what kind of research. "I can look into the firm's registration. Belgian law firms are required to be registered with the Ordre de Bureaux Francophones. If Vandermeer, Clays is on that registry, that's a meaningful indicator of legitimacy." I thanked him. I told him I would wait to hear from him before doing anything. He called me 4 days later. He said he had found a registration listing consistent with the firm's name in the Belgian bar database. He said he believed I should respond cautiously, but that the letter was worth pursuing. I want to pause here and tell you something that I did not understand until much later. Daniel Marsh volunteered all of this. I did not ask him to research the firm. I did not ask him to verify anything. He offered, unprompted, to help me navigate the process. At the time, I read this as the action of a thorough professional and a caring friend. I did not yet understand that the most dangerous kind of guidance is the kind that steers you somewhere you are already inclined to go. I wrote back to the firm in Brussels in early November. The response arrived within 4 days, faster than I expected from an international legal office. The reply was signed by a man named Peter Vandermeer, senior partner. His English was formal and precise, with the particular grammatical structure of someone who had learned the language academically rather than conversationally. He thanked me for my response, confirmed my identity through 3 pieces of documentation I provided, and then explained that before the estate could proceed to transfer, Belgian probate law required the payment of an international processing fee of $1,200 to the court registry. He was careful to frame this not as a payment to his firm, but as a court requirement. He provided what appeared to be an official Belgian court account number for the wire transfer. I called Daniel. He said that international probate fees were standard in European estate law. He said $1,200 on a potential inheritance of $340,000 was not unreasonable. He said if I was uncomfortable, I didn't have to proceed, but that in his professional opinion, the fee was consistent with what he would expect from a legitimate Belgian estate process. I wired $1,200 on a Thursday morning in the second week of November. I remember the exact feeling as I confirmed the transfer, a specific combination of excitement and discomfort that I filed under the category of reasonable nervousness about an unusual situation. I had never inherited anything in my life. I had no framework for what this was supposed to feel like. The confirmation email from Peter Vandermeer arrived within the hour. 2 weeks later, Peter Vandermeer called me. I had not expected a phone call. His voice was what I had imagined from his emails, measured, professionally warm, with a Dutch-inflected English that gave his sentences a slightly formal cadence. He called at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, which struck me as a considerate hour for a transatlantic call accounting for the time difference. He asked after my health. He asked whether the Virginia autumn was as beautiful as he had read. He mentioned, in passing, that he had noticed from my documentation that I was recently retired and offered his congratulations, noting that 34 years in education was a remarkable career. I set down the glass I was holding. I had not told him I was a librarian. I had not told him I was retired. I had provided my name, my date of birth, my address, and a copy of my passport. That was all. I told myself he must have found it through the genealogical research. Public records. A school district website, perhaps. I had been listed on the Jefferson High Library page for years. I told myself this, and I almost believed it. The call lasted 22 minutes. By the end of it, I felt, despite myself, that I was dealing with a real person in a real office in a real city on the other side of the Atlantic. He was too specific, too unhurried, too quietly professional to be anything other than what he presented himself as. That specificity was not authenticity. It was preparation. The second fee arrived in a letter dated the 1st of December. $3,400. Currency conversion and international transfer preparation costs, required by Belgian financial regulation before any cross-border estate disbursement could be initiated. This one gave me pause in a way the first had not. Not because of the amount, though $3,400 was a meaningful sum, but because of the momentum of it. The way one fee followed naturally from the last. The way each step felt logical only because the previous step had already been taken. I called my sister Diane before I called Daniel. She was quiet for a moment when I told her the full story, the letter, the first fee, the phone call, the second fee. Then she said, carefully, "Carol, have you Googled any of this?" I told her I had looked up the firm's name and found a website. That's not the same as Googling it. Type the firm name and the word scam and see what comes up. I told her Daniel had verified the registration. She was quiet again. Then she said she loved me and she hoped it was real, but that something about it made her uneasy. I called Daniel after I hung up with Diane. I told him about my sister's concern. He listened. He said it was natural to be cautious. He said he understood the hesitation. He said that in his professional judgment, the documentation remained consistent with a legitimate proceeding, and that $3,400 was still a small percentage of the total inheritance amount. He said he would be concerned if I didn't proceed and then lost the inheritance over a fee I had declined to pay. I wired $3,400 on December the 4th. I did not do the search my sister had suggested. I wish I had done the search my sister had suggested. The first unexplained withdrawal appeared on my January bank statement. $340, listed as an electronic transfer to an account number I did not recognize, dated January the 9th. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I called the bank. The representative told me it had been an authorized electronic transfer initiated through my online banking credentials. She asked if I had made the transfer myself. I told her I had not. She flagged it for review and told me someone would be in touch within 5 business days. I called Daniel. He said it was almost certainly a processing fee associated with the international transfer preparation. That Belgian financial institutions sometimes initiated small debit verifications of the recipient account before initiating the main transfer. He said it was unusual, but not unprecedented in his experience with European estate transactions. I accepted this. The bank's fraud department called me 3 days later. They said the transfer had originated from what appeared to be an authorized login to my online account from an IP address in Eastern Europe. They said they were treating it as potentially fraudulent and had reversed the charge. They asked if I wanted to change my online banking password and enable 2-factor authentication. I said yes. I changed everything that afternoon. What I did not yet understand was that the password change was already too late. That the damage had not been done through my online banking login. That there was another way into my accounts, one that did not require a password at all, because it came through someone who already had everything he needed on paper. In February, Peter Vandermeer's letter requested $8,500. Belgian inheritance tax advance payment, he explained. Required by the Belgian Federal Tax Authority as a condition of estate release for non-resident beneficiaries. He attached what appeared to be an official document from the Belgian Federal Public Service Finance, a stamped, formatted document with an official-looking crest, confirming the tax obligation. $8,500. I sat with that letter for 2 days before I did anything. On the first day, I called Matthew in Denver. He had not heard the full story until then. I had mentioned the inheritance in passing, but had not walked him through the details. I told him everything, from the first letter to the current request. He was quiet in the way he was sometimes quiet when he was thinking carefully rather than reacting quickly. Then he said, "Mom, before you do anything else, I want you to call the Belgian embassy in Washington. Not the law firm. Not Daniel. The actual Belgian embassy. And ask them whether this firm exists and whether this tax obligation is real." I told him Daniel had already verified the firm. "I know, but I want you to verify it yourself. Independently. Can you do that before you make any decision?" I told him I would. I called Daniel first, old habit, the reflex of 13 years. I told him Matthew's suggestion. Daniel said it was a reasonable instinct, but that Belgian embassy staff were not always current on private legal matters and might not be able to confirm or deny a specific firm's registration. He said the most reliable verification was through the official bar registry, which he had already done. He said he was happy to send me the registration documentation again if it would give me peace of mind. He sent it within the hour. A screenshot of what appeared to be an official registry entry. I looked at it. I compared it to the letterhead on Vandermeer's correspondence. Everything aligned. I did not call the Belgian embassy that day. I told myself I would do it the next morning. The next morning, I wired $8,500. I called the Belgian embassy 3 days later. The consular officer who answered my call at the Belgian embassy in Washington was a woman with a brisk, precise manner and very good English. I explained the situation from the beginning, the letter, the firm's name, the fees, the tax documentation. She put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, her voice had changed. It had lost its brisk efficiency and become something more deliberate. "Mrs. Whitfield, I have searched our records. There is no legal firm registered in Belgium under the name Vandermeer, Clays and Associates at any address in Brussels or elsewhere in the country." I told her about the bar registry screenshot Daniel had sent me. The official Order de Bureau's database is publicly accessible. I am looking at it now. There is no entry consistent with this firm's name. What you were shown was not from our registry. I asked about the tax document, the Federal Public Service Finance stamp. I cannot speak to a specific document without seeing it. But I can tell you that Belgium does not charge non-resident beneficiaries an advance inheritance tax payment as a condition of estate release. That is not how our tax system works. The room was very quiet. I asked her one more question. I asked whether a man named Heinrich Albrecht Whitfield had died in Ghent in August of the previous year. She searched for several minutes. I find no record of a death registration under that name in the Ghent civil records for that period. I thanked her. I set the phone down on the kitchen table. I sat very still for a long time. Then I picked the phone back up and called Daniel Marsh. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I called a 3rd time. Voicemail. I sent a text message. "Daniel, I need to speak with you immediately. Please call me back." The message showed as delivered. It was never read. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the bed on Sycamore Lane where Robert had slept beside me for 31 years, and I went back through 13 years of April mornings at the kitchen table, the tax documents spread between us, the coffee, the easy professional conversation, the way he always said goodbye with a brief warm handshake and the words, "See you next year, Carol, take care of yourself." 13 years. He had known my account numbers. He had known my balances. He had known when Robert died, when I retired, when I was at my most alone and my most financially exposed. He had known every number that mattered. At 6:45 in the morning, I called my sister Diane. I told her everything. All of it. The embassy call. The unanswered phone. The withdrawal in January that the bank had reversed, but that I now understood differently. I told her I thought Daniel Marsh had helped someone target me. She was at my door 40 minutes later. We drove to Daniel's office together at 9 in the morning. It was a 2-story building on West Broad Street that he had occupied for 11 years. His name was still on the frosted glass of the second-floor suite. The door was locked. The lights were off. A woman from the accounting firm next door came out into the hallway while we were standing there. She looked at us with an expression of cautious recognition. "Are you looking for Daniel? He hasn't been in since Monday. We thought he might be ill." Today was Friday. We drove back to Sycamore Lane, and I called the FBI Financial Crimes Hotline from my kitchen table with Diane sitting across from me and my hands completely steady in a way that surprised me. I had passed through panic sometime around 3 in the morning and come out the other side into something else, a cold, clarifying anger that had the same texture as the clarity I had felt the morning after Robert died. When I understood that grief would not wait and neither would the world, and that the only way through was forward. I reported everything. Every date, every amount, every document. The agent who took my information was methodical and unhurried. At the end, she said she was transferring my case to the Richmond field office and that someone would contact me within 24 hours. Then I called my bank. I froze every account. I closed the online banking access entirely. I requested a full transaction audit going back 18 months. The audit results arrived 4 days later. The unauthorized withdrawals had been happening since October. Small amounts, 300 here, 400 there, 900, 600, timed at irregular intervals to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. Always initiated through the same method, a third-party financial management authorization that Daniel Marsh had been added to my account as years earlier, when I had given him limited access to pull statements for tax preparation purposes. He had never removed himself from that authorization. I had never thought to check. In total, between the fees I had wired and the withdrawals I had not seen coming, $94,000. $94,000. 30 years of careful choices. Packed lunches and sensible cars and vacations close to home. Gone. The FBI agent assigned to my case was a woman named Special Agent Teresa Vance, out of the Richmond field office. She was 41 years old, efficient, and had the particular quality of someone who has heard terrible things so often that they no longer perform sympathy, but deliver it in a quieter and more useful form, through thoroughness, through follow-through, through calling when she said she would call. She came to my house on a Monday morning with a colleague and spent 3 hours going through everything. Every document, every email, every wire transfer confirmation. She asked precise questions. She took precise notes. She did not tell me what she was finding, but there was a point in the second hour when she and her colleague exchanged a look over a document I had handed them, the bar registry screenshot Daniel had sent me. And something in that look told me that this was not the first time they had seen this particular piece of paper. Before they left, Agent Vance told me 2 things. She said I should not contact Daniel Marsh again under any circumstances. And she said she wanted me to know that what had happened to me was not a reflection of my intelligence or my judgment. She said she needed me to hear that because in her experience, the first thing people in my situation did was blame themselves, and the second thing they did was stop cooperating with investigators because the shame became too heavy to carry in public. "You were targeted," she said, "at my front door, with the October light coming through the oak trees on Sycamore Lane. Specifically, deliberately, and by someone who spent years earning the right to access your trust. That is not naivety. That is what a sophisticated, long-term fraud looks like from the inside." I thanked her. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway of my house for a very long time. Daniel Marsh was arrested 11 days after I filed my report. He was found at his sister's house in Roanoke, Virginia, where he had been staying since the Monday he stopped answering his phone. He had not fled the country. He had not transferred his assets abroad. He had driven 2 hours south on Interstate 81 and appeared to have been waiting for what, I cannot say. Perhaps for the moment to pass. Perhaps for some outcome he had not yet clearly imagined. The investigation that followed was conducted jointly by the FBI's Richmond Field Office and Europol's Financial Crimes Division. What they found was larger than my case. Daniel Marsh had been working with an overseas network for at least 2 years. His role was specific. He provided client financial profiles to his contacts abroad, account numbers, balances, personal details, the timing of major life transitions like retirement or bereavement that made clients vulnerable to targeted fraud. He had done this to 7 of his clients in total. I was the 5th. The total value of fraud across all 7 victims was $1.2 million. He was charged with wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. He was tried in federal court in Richmond. His attorney argued that he had acted under financial pressure, that his own business had been struggling, that he had been approached by the overseas network and had initially resisted before circumstances pushed him toward compliance. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Daniel Marsh was sentenced to 6 years and 4 months in a federal minimum security facility in Cumberland, Maryland. He began serving his sentence on a Tuesday in March. He will be 61 years old when he is released. The Virginia Board of Accountancy permanently revoked his CPA license within 30 days of his conviction. The revocation is public record. His name appears in the disciplinary database that anyone can search. The civil judgment against him, filed on behalf of all 7 victims, ordered full restitution. In my case, $94,000 to be paid through a combination of asset liquidation and a wage garnishment order applied to his prison work program earnings over the duration of his sentence and beyond. The overseas network presented a more complicated picture. The 2 men in Belgium, one of whom had been the voice of Peter Vandermeer on the phone, a man named Luc Goossens, 44, who spoke 4 languages and had been running inheritance fraud operations across Western Europe for 6 years, were ultimately extradited and convicted in Belgian courts. Goossens received 5 years. His partner received 3. The 3rd member of the network, based in Bucharest, was identified but never extradited. Peter Vandermeer, the warm and precisely spoken man who had congratulated me on my retirement and asked about the Virginia autumn, had never been a lawyer, had never been to law school, had never set foot in a courtroom except as a defendant. He had been, for 6 years, an exceptionally good actor with a good microphone and a quiet room. I want to be honest about the money, because in stories like this people tend to either gloss over the financial reality or sensationalize it, and neither serves the truth. I recovered $41,000. It came from 3 sources: a partial bank fraud insurance payout of $18,000 covering the unauthorized withdrawals that had been made through Daniel's third-party access, a victim restitution fund disbursement of $14,000 distributed among the 7 victims from Daniel's liquidated business assets, and the first $9,000 of direct restitution from the civil judgment, paid before Daniel reported to begin his sentence. The remaining $53,000 I rebuilt myself. I returned to work in January of the following year, not full-time, not back to Jefferson High, but as a consulting librarian for 3 school districts in the greater Richmond area, helping them update their collections and their digital resource programs. I worked 4 days a week. I charged a fair rate. I did the work I had always been good at, and I did it for 3.5 years, and by the spring of last year the number in my savings account was back where it had been before that cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox on a Thursday morning in October. I want you to hear that. Not because the rebuilding erases what happened. It does not. Not because $53,000 and 3.5 years of work is a small thing. It is not a small thing. But because I need you to know that the story did not end in the kitchen on Sycamore Lane with $94,000 missing and a phone that went unanswered. That was not the end. That was the lowest point on a line that continued upward. It always continued upward. There is one more thing I want to tell you. In the 2nd month after Daniel's arrest, when the investigation was still ongoing and I was still giving statements and producing documents, I found myself one evening going back through my files from the years he had managed my taxes, looking for something I am not entirely sure what. Evidence of earlier wrongdoing, perhaps. Or some sign I had missed. Some moment where the mask had slipped and I had chosen not to see it. I did not find that moment. The files were clean. The returns were accurate. The advice he had given me over 13 years had been, by every measurable standard, good advice. He had been a good accountant for a long time before he became something else. That is the part that stays with me. Not the betrayal in the abstract. I have made peace with the betrayal. What stays with me is the question of when. When did it change? When did Daniel Marsh look at the list of people who trusted him with their most private financial details and begin to see not clients, but assets? Was it a single decision? A slow drift? A moment of pressure that bent something in him that never bent back? I do not know. I will never know. Agent Vance told me, at one of our last meetings, that in her experience people who committed this kind of fraud rarely had a single clear turning point. That it was usually a gradual erosion, small compromises, each one made possible by the last, until the person who had started the process was nearly unrecognizable to the person who ended it. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about all the things in this life that work that way. I've been asked, since I began telling this story, whether I am angry. The honest answer is, yes. Not the hot, consuming anger of the first weeks, that burned itself out by spring, but a steady, cooler anger that I have decided to keep. Not because it makes me feel better to be angry, but because I think some things deserve to be held on to. Some things should not be forgiven into convenience. Daniel Marsh will spend 6 years in a federal facility in Cumberland, Maryland. And when he walks out, he will be a 61-year-old man with a revoked license and a public disciplinary record and the specific reputation of someone who stole from widows and retirees. That is a proportionate consequence. I hold my anger carefully, like a lamp rather than a fire, and I use it to stay clear. But anger is not the lesson. Anger is just the feeling. The lesson is this. The most sophisticated frauds are not random. They are not mass emails sent to 10,000 addresses hoping one person clicks. The sophisticated ones are targeted. They are designed around what the perpetrators already know about you, your name, your finances, your family situation, your vulnerabilities, the specific moment in your life when you are most likely to want something to be true. That information does not appear out of nowhere. Someone provides it. Someone who has been inside your financial life, an accountant, an advisor, a banker, a financial planner, and who has decided that your trust is a resource to be extracted rather than a responsibility to be honored. This is what I know now that I did not know before. Verify independently. Always. Not through the person who brought you the opportunity, through a completely separate, unconnected source. If someone tells you a Belgian law firm is legitimate, call the Belgian embassy yourself. If someone tells you a tax obligation is real, call the relevant tax authority yourself. The few minutes it takes to make that call are the cheapest insurance you will ever purchase. Review your accounts regularly, not just the balances, but the transactions. Every line. Every transfer. Every authorization you have granted to third parties, including professionals who have had access to your accounts for years and whom you have no reason to distrust. Remove authorizations that are no longer actively needed. Ask your bank to notify you of any transfer above a threshold you set. These are small steps that create large obstacles for people who are counting on your inattention. And listen to the people who love you. My sister Diane told me to search the firm's name with the word scam. My son Matthew told me to call the Belgian embassy myself. I did not do either of those things immediately. I filtered their concern through Daniel's reassurance and found a reason not to act. I am telling you this not to punish myself. I've stopped punishing myself, but because I want you to understand that the people in your life who ask uncomfortable questions are not obstacles to your good fortune. They are the last line of defense between you and the people who are studying you. I still live on Sycamore Lane. The house is the same, the oak trees in the front, the kitchen where I have made my coffee for 32 years, the chair by the window where I read in the mornings now that my weeks are finally, genuinely my own. I have a new accountant, a woman named Patricia who was recommended to me by 3 separate people I trust and whom I interviewed with the thoroughness of someone who has learned what thoroughness is actually for. I still do occasional consulting work, not because I need the money now but because I discovered, during the years I was rebuilding, that I had not been ready to leave the work after all. That the 34 years at Jefferson High had not depleted me but had defined me, and that I was better with a purpose than without one. Matthew calls every Sunday. Diane comes for dinner every Wednesday. The retirement I had imagined with Robert, the long mornings, the nowhere to be, the reading without checking the time, I am having it. Later than planned. Differently than planned. But I am having it. On the kitchen windowsill, I keep a photograph of Robert, taken on a Saturday afternoon in the backyard this summer before he died. He is looking at the garden with an expression of complete contentment, the expression of a man who is exactly where he wants to be, doing nothing in particular and finding it sufficient. I look at that photograph every morning. I think he would have been so angry on my behalf. I think he also would have told me, eventually, to let it go and tend the garden. I am working on both of those things simultaneously. If you are watching this and you have a trusted professional, an accountant, an advisor, anyone who has access to your financial information, I am asking you to do one thing. Not tomorrow. Today. Go to your bank's website and look at the list of third-party authorizations on your accounts. See who has access. See what level of access they have. Ask yourself when you last actively confirmed that access was still appropriate. This is not paranoia. This is maintenance. The same way you change the locks when you move into a house rather than assuming the previous owners no longer have copies of the key. And if something arrives, a letter, an email, a phone call, telling you that something unexpected and wonderful is waiting for you on the other side of a fee, a form, a payment, call someone who has nothing to gain. Call them first. Before the person who brought you the news. Before the person who is offering to help you navigate it. Call someone who loves you and has nothing to gain. They will ask the right questions. They always do. Have you ever trusted someone with access to your financial life and later discovered that trust had been used against you? Tell me your story in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me how you rebuilt.